There are so many videos about Outer Wilds out there already. They range from fascinating observations to deeply personal readings. And I love to hear those interpretations. I get to learn or even immerse myself in ways I didn't personally experience this thing. It kind of deepens my love for the game. So here's my contribution to the pile. I want to talk about a specific experience in my playthrough and what I learned from it. It's a very specific sequence of events. It's also something I heard very few people ever mention. But for me, it led to the most anxiety and curiosity-inducing game experience I ever had. It made me wonder if this was even intended by the developers. Can some game advice even be taken from this? Eventually, I even reached out to Alex Beecham, the creative director of the game, because I had to know. I needed to have them shed light on their design decisions and what the hell I had just experienced. But first, let me tell you what I'm even talking about. It all starts when you accidentally end the game. When you start your first expedition, you are free to explore Timber Hearth, the home of the Hearthians and essentially the tutorial area. There's a lot to discover, but too much curiosity might already get to you. Like, wouldn't it be fun to jump into this big geyser and shoot myself into the sky? There must be something down this big waterfall. I wonder what's gonna happen if I jump into this ghost matter. Or you might just play around with the controls and accidentally step onto the campfire for too long. Odds are you die before you even progress the game. In that case, you get greeted with a big "You are dead" screen, which lingers and slowly fades into dark. And probably you just expected to respawn at the nearest bonfire. But the game does something very unexpected. The credits start rolling and you get back into the main menu, with no save file to load, so you have to start a brand new game. When this happens, it might just come off as a cheeky joke from the developers, or you might be very confused by this. Either way, it will likely stick with you for a while and maybe, like in my case, plant the seed for an incredible endgame. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After this early death, you're likely way more cautious, trying not to die again, until you finally reach the observatory and have the memory bonding moment with the Nomai statue. You get pulled into a time loop, and every time you die, your game is saved. You get to live the next 22 minutes again and again until the sun explodes, or until the trademark Hearthian curiosity gets to you first. With the consequences of death now being removed, you are invited to explore fearlessly. At first, you might still start out as a clumsy first-time astronaut, scared by mind and space-bending environments, or intimidated by the granular and gravity-based controls. But in time, you gain more experience and embrace that death is a worthwhile risk for hard-earned scientific discoveries. And so the unknown becomes ever more clear. You die over and over again, which enables you to quickly live all the game has to offer. And in the end, it all leads you to discover the Ash Twin project, where it becomes clear what's next, even when it's never outright stated. You need to take its power source down a perilous path into dark bramble and power the vessel that takes you to the ending. There's basically no ambiguity here. If you do this, you will shut down the time machine that kept you going all this time. And at this point, you might think back to the beginning of the game, when you died before entering the time loop, how it ended with no save file to return to. So you might be terrified at the question, will this happen again? Is this going to go permadeath right at the end? When I reached this point in the game, I fully believed that if I died without the time loop machine intact, that the consequences would be severe. My mind went racing. I knew that the whole game was built around the knowledge in my head and any saved notes. So if the save file is actually deleted, what would that mean? Would it be really that bad? How could I be sure that all of this info is still relevant once I press that new expedition button in the main menu again? There's a consistent theme of quantum mechanics in the game, and various elements are randomized. What if the coordinates to the eye of the universe are random as well? So far, the most reliable way of getting answers in the game was to go at it practically. Just throw myself at the problem and find out from experience. or to find recorded experience of others. But this time, it's completely uncharted territory, and I felt like the stakes were actually pretty high. So I rehearsed the final run a few times until I felt comfortable enough to dare to go for it. I'd say the final run to reach the ending that the developers have crafted is already a breathtaking experience. The time pressure of only having 22 minutes to do it, the remixed version of the End Times soundtrack that chases you even deep into dark ramble, like a constant reminder that the sun is still about to consume you. How you need to silently drift past a nest of anglerfish, which I did in my spacesuit, by the way, because I thought the spaceship wouldn't fit through. All the while hearing nothing but the breathing, the echoes of the soundtrack, and your own heartbeat. That you have to desperately put in the coordinates right at the end with the intentionally clunky controls. But the fact that I believed it might be the only shot I get, that I was holding what represents my Hearthian life and personal playthrough in my hands, made it so much more immersive and impactful. Is there any other game that does this? Letting you rehearse safely before doing it for real with the threat of consequences? The game is all about curiosity, and it grants you a safety net to explore without fear. And right at the end, the game puts the safety net into question and challenges your curiosity with the threat of irreversible consequences. And then it makes you need to overcome that fear to complete the game. Fucking brilliant, 14.3 billion out of 10, best fetch quest I've ever completed. So that was my experience. But I want to dig a bit deeper. How did the game achieve this? I wanted to really understand the mechanics and writing lessons that can be learned from this. What I believe is that the game pulls multiple clever tricks to erase the separation between the player and the character you play. This didn't just lead to more immersion, but also strengthened the experience this game tried to tell. Okay, let me break this down a bit. I think the bedrock that enables this is how the game handles the player perspective and how the way you interact with what's around you. It does a remarkable job in not making you think about the person you're playing as, or at least not too much. It doesn't force a very defined perspective or character onto you. Instead, you are just playing the game yourself. There are a few things that contribute to this. The easiest to spot is the first-person perspective. Even when you drift off into sleep, you can see that your 4 eyes are closing slowly. The little Hearthian whose body you take control of doesn't even have a name. No important past, or arguably not even really much of an important relationship to any of the characters you meet. They know you, but your interaction with them is very minimal. It's just enough to give you important information and make you empathize with them. The game does a really smart move of putting the character you play in the same role as whoever just picked up the controller. Basically, you are a fresh new astronaut who gets to explore the solar system and uncover the mysteries it has to offer. You get a bunch of new equipment, a brand new translator, and a spaceship that you now get to learn how to use. Good luck. Just go up there and see what you can find. Where do you want to go first? It often feels like the game is written to directly address the player. But that's just how the game feeds you the information. Another vital contributor is how the game takes player behavior and input into account. Arguably, anything you do in the game can be seen as plausible Hearthian behavior. The way they are written as a species and culture blends very well with the free-spirited, adventurous, and reckless curiosity that a player is likely to engage in. Hearthians are not going to calculate astral trajectories and study what they are getting into first. No, they just build a wooden rickety rocket and clumsily shoot themselves into space with it to find out for themselves. The time loop just enables you to be even more daring. So the game is tailoring the character to the player behavior rather than causing dissonance by making you roleplay as someone you're not. but I don't want to leave out the UI and sound design. For example, there's plenty of music that can be heard by people around you or other explorers and devices in the world, instead of only having a soundtrack that plays in the background. Or the UI elements that are part of your items, equipment, or cockpit interfaces and display screens. You see them in the game. Even when you open menus like your ship log computer, it's framed as the character looking at a screen. You can even see the reflection of your ship interior on the screen. The game also uses UI elements that don't exist within the world of the game, like the signal scope UI. But it mixes them really well and follows conventions wherever necessary so they don't draw attention to themselves. All of this leads to the player comfortably inserting themselves into the world more directly. In stark contrast to all of this then is the moment where you die early in the game. The credits roll and you get kicked out and you need to start over. That clearly doesn't help making the game more immersive, right? But I'll argue that it does. Let me explain why I think this quite brilliantly reinforces both the player and the character perspective and strengthens the immersion of the game. First of all, it's good to call these elements by their name. It's paratext. In a nutshell, this means elements that frame the game's narrative. In literature, this usually includes the book cover, title, foreword, and anything else that can be found around the main narrative. For video games, this would also include the main menu, pause menu, the credits, but interestingly, these are all not completely separated from the experience itself. Clever use of paratext can manipulate your reading of a story. A book cover, advertisement, or foreword, or a main menu will give you an idea of what lies ahead, even if the experience doesn't match that. And the credits and director commentary can color your experience and opinion after finishing it. Fascinating then that Outer Wilds throws this at you during the game though. This has a purpose. What does this sudden use of paratext tell you? For one, die outside of the time loop and you'll have to restart the game back from zero. But as a logical follow-up, in this timeline of events, the main character irreversibly died. This paratextual moment, as much as reasonably possible, aligned these two readings between the player's and main character's perspective. So then, by demonstrating early on the consequences of dying in a narratively established permanent way, it tricks you into believing that the next real death will hit you harder, the player and the character. Or at least, that's what happened to me. But you already played the game, of course, so you know that Outer Wilds is not going to erase your save file. And they especially don't randomize crucial information to prevent the player from finishing the game. I think that would be overly cruel and unnecessary, and it's good that they didn't go there. So why would this all work then, if it's so easy to find out the truth? The moment you kill yourself, the jig is up. But even if you'd be ready to call the game's bluff, there will likely be a bit of fear in the back of your mind that there could be some surprise waiting for you. The game introduces this choice of calling the bluff very late, so there's an actual weight behind the decision. In my opinion, that's already a great success. But it's not even guaranteed that the game succeeds at this. Once you go for the final voyage, you might die very easily and fast. And then the question is answered and the pressure is lifted. There are even plenty of players that were so thrown off by the early ending in the game that they googled for more info first, or asked in forums whether the game is actually permadeath. So some people would rather break the immersion than deal with this level of tension. So there needs to be some luck or skill on the player's side to not die in the end, and the willingness to approach the game on its own terms. The only way I see the developers could have avoided this problem is if they held the player's hand or limited their options to die in the final run. But they clearly didn't want to go that route. Instead, the player kept their complete freedom. But at some point I started wondering if this is just my own reading or if the developers crafted this experience intentionally. So I actually got in contact with Alex Beecham, the creative director of Outer Wilds. And he was actually so kind to answer me and shine some light on their thought process. Here's what Alex had to say. The decision to let you die in the village was mostly motivated by two things. First, allowing players to die by doing obviously dangerous things, like jumping into Gazier or Ghost Matter, helps set the tone of, this world will kill you if you're careless or not paying attention. Second, the first time loop flashback hits much harder if the players are expected to see you are dead and to be kicked back into the main menu. Third, I lied about there being two things. It would have been really weird to let the player stand on a lit campfire and just never die. So in some sense, we had no choice since rule consistency was very important to us. That rule consistency then ended up really working in our favor for the endgame for the reasons you mentioned, but no, we didn't explicitly allow death during the tutorial to make that final run hit harder. More of a happy accident. Oh, and also fourth, rolling credits 5 minutes into the game is just really funny. So here's my takeaway. Everyone will have played a different game to some extent, and the developers seem to have a strong focus on not dictating an overly curated journey. But their creative decisions led me, and I'd argue every player, to take the game seriously and think logically about their own actions and the consequences. What I experienced might have been an extreme case, but this effect is likely to be felt on all players. In a GDC talk, Kelsey Beecham, the writer of the game, said, "Please stop telling me to care. Please make me care. Don't assign me an objective to care." Players don't just do what they're told. You need to make an experience that respects them. Outer Wilds didn't just succeed in sparking curiosity, it succeeded in responding to it as well. It went the extra mile and played with us instead of just us playing the game. It made me terrified without ever telling me to or forcing me to be in a cheap way. And I'm not just talking about making players afraid of their save file. There are more ways this can be used. I see this as a potential toolbox for immersion. So I wanted to share an idea, to give an example of how this could potentially be used in an actionable way. For example, so think of a Telltale-like adventure game, where it's all about split-second decision making. Many players maybe did the same thing I did. They tend to just pause the game to give themselves more time. It's a common behavior and it can hurt the immersion, in my opinion. Why not accommodate the player behavior instead? Use the paratextual space to your advantage. Let's instead imagine a game where the main character has the ability to stop time to think things over. And the way the player does that is by having to literally pause the game. It still behaves and looks mostly like a regular pause menu to you, but for the character, it was frozen time. You both get to breathe for a moment and think things over. Think about how you could both discover this ability by accident, or by experimentation, or even by the game's writing telling you this via in-game dialogue. Think about how the game design approach could be extended to stealth games like Hitman and safe scumming. There's so many ways to put the character and the player in the same shoes. Most games won't really need to do this, of course. Trying something unconventional like using your paratext as a game mechanic can accidentally lead to making it all too meta instead. But sometimes, when taking extra risks, it might just end up in a way more interesting game. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Vivien Lulkowski for making this video with me and keep pushing me forward to work on it more. You can thank her for creating the amazing background drawings and 2D animations as well. I was considering for a while to make these kinds of videos, but never really thought I had enough to say to do it. I think this is an interesting outlet to talk about games and game design I like. While I'd be perfectly happy with just having made this one video, maybe I'll get back to making more. How many will watch this video doesn't really matter to me at this point. Also, if you're interested in games that kind of go in the direction of what I was talking about, try out Pathologic 2 or Hellblade. I will leave it at that, just to not give any spoilers, but I also didn't want to leave out any recommendations. The art and animation in the background was also created using Blender's 2D animation toolset Grease Pencil. I really liked playing around with the features and seeing what kind of effects and scene setups I can come up with. I'll see if I can share a bit more on the workflow of how I put this together online, what went well and what went wrong, but Until then, take care, and maybe I'll see you in the next video.